Hey there, class. Mr. Brusky here. Hope you're having a good day so far. We're continuing with Chapter 8, which is mostly about quadrilaterals. We have some new quadrilaterals we're talking about today. We've talked about parallelograms in the past and other types of polygons. That quadrilateral flowchart that we were given, or that should be maybe in your packet, make sure you refer to that. And remember, on the flowchart, at the top, so everything like below, like, so basically if like a rhombus is both a parallelogram and a quadrilateral, a rhombus is going to have all the characteristics of everything above it. So the arrow's pointing down, everything on the bottom is going to have characteristics of everything above it, okay? So let's talk about different types of shapes here. A rhombus, a rhombus is going to be a parallelogram with four congruent sides. Four congruent what? Sides. All right. A rectangle is a parallelogram with four right angles. And a square is going to be both a rhombus and a rectangle, which means it has what? Four congruent sides and four right angles. All right, nice. Okay. We also have some corollaries, which are like kind of side things that were proven or assumed. Actually, corollaries are things that are assumed, I believe. So things that are just kind of assumed to be true based on, what a rhombus is. So let's see here. Quadrilateral is a rhombus if and only if it has four congruent sides. Okay. We talked about here four right angles. Okay. All right, and a square, like we talked about, has four, is both a rhombus and a rectangle, which means it has all the characteristics of both of those. Nice. All right, sounds good. Okay, for example 1, I want you guys to kind of think about what this might mean here, okay? For any rhombus, RSTV, determine whether the statement is always true or sometimes true, and draw a sketch and explain your reasoning, okay? So what I would like you to do, for these kind of problems, it's a good idea to draw like the most specific case, right? Because if you draw like a square, which is a rhombus, that's also a rectangle, which kind of blurs kind of what they might be here, okay? So I'm going to draw, we'll see if you can pause it, see if you can figure this out. We'll pause the video. We'll go through it in a second. All right, I'm going to draw a rhombus like this. It's not going to be perfect. Let's just call this R, S, T, and V, right? And the rhombus means these are all congruent. So I like to draw the most specific case for these problems to determine whether, like, to really isolate, like, it's only a rhombus, and that'll kind of help us determine if it's going to be always or sometimes true. So let's look at this here, okay? So we have angle S is congruent to angle V. Well, like we know that a rhombus is a parallelogram, and what do we know about the opposite angles of parallelograms? They're going to be congruent, right? So we know that these, this is going to be always. The reason why is a rhombus is a parallelogram. Okay? How about this one? T is congruent to V. We'll use a different color. T is congruent to V. We can kind of see now that these are not really the same angle right here, right? This is wider, this is shorter, that's an obtuse and acute angle. So are these congruent or no? The answer is not. It's not right now, because this, you can tell this is kind of like, this is like a normal rhombus. So when would it be true? When would these angles be congruent? Well, it would be if the rhombus was a square, right? So this is going to be sometimes. It's not always, because we can tell it's not in this case. But if it is a square, then we can assume that it's going to be, those are going to be congruent. Okay? All right, sounds good. Example 2, we're classifying here. Classify the special quadrilateral, explain your reasoning. All right, why don't you guys see if you can figure this out. Go ahead. Okay, it looks like we have four congruent sides here, so we know it's going to be what kind of shape, at least. Well, it's going to be at least a rhombus, and also when it says classify, you want to use the most specific. Like, this is a quadrilateral, but there's a more specific name for it, right? So you don't just want to say quadrilateral, because that could be a trapezoid, it could be a kite, it could be any kinds of things. So in this case, it looks like it's going to be a rhombus. Is there anything else that would help us with this? Well, the 127, it's not a square because they have to be all 90-degree angles. So for this one, it's going to be a rhombus. That's the most specific name we can use for this, okay? All right, so why don't you guys go ahead and do the checkpoint, see how you do. All right, for any square CDEF, is it always or sometimes true that CD is congruent to DE? So we have C, D, E, and F. So what makes something a square? Well, it's a rhombus, all the sides are congruent, and it's a rectangle, which means all the angles are 90 degrees. So what do you think? Is CD always congruent to DE? It is, because it's a rhombus. So it's always, and the reason why, all sides, or I'll just say a square is a rhombus. That's why. That's why it's going to be a thing. Okay? A square is a rhombus. Okay? All right. And then it says, for checkpoint 2, a quadrilateral has 4 congruent sides and 4 congruent angles. Classify the quadrilateral. Which type of shape has that? A square. A square is both a rhombus and a rectangle. All right, very cool. Moving on. We have some other kind of properties here. And so these are all kind of going to be on that flowchart, sorry, the quadrilateral flowchart. So let's fill these in. So a rhombus is going to have diagonals that are perpendicular. Okay. So AC is perpendicular to BD. Another thing with a rhombus is that the diagonals bisect opposite angles. So we know angle A is congruent to angle C, and angle, oops, that's not an A. Angle A is congruent to angle C, and angle B is congruent to angle D. Actually, it splits those angles, my fault. So it splits those angles. They're not congruent. I mean, they are congruent, but they're going to be split into 2 congruent parts. And the last thing we can say, a rectangle is going to have diagonals that are congruent. Okay, so we can say that AC is congruent to BD. Okay, and those are all on, like I said, that quadrilateral flowchart. Okay. Let's see here. We're going to skip example 3. Let's just get rid of that one. Don't like it. Example 4. Let's see here. You're building a frame. It's to solve a real world problem. You're building a frame for a painting. The measurements of the frame are given. The frame needs to be a rectangle. It says, given the measurements of the diagram, can you assume that this is? So we have this diagram over here on the right. Looks like we have opposite sides are congruent. Can we assume it's going to be a rectangle right now? What makes something a rectangle? Well, a rectangle is going to have 4 right angles. We know that these angles are right angles. We can't really tell that. We could, if I kind of were to accentuate this a little bit, right? I could kind of go like this to make it, this is 16, 16. It's kind of a little bit more accentuated. Like, I mean, those are still basically the same thing, right? It doesn't say anything about the angles. So in this case, we cannot. So we know the opposite side's congruent, right? The opposite sides are congruent, but we can't guarantee, or we can't, let's see here, assume right angles, okay? Which makes something a rectangle. It kind of looks like a rectangle, but we don't know anything about the angles. All right. Now, let's see here. It says you measure the diagonals of the frame, and they're about 25.6 inches. Now what can we conclude about the shape of the frame? So we can say that the diagonals are congruent. Now, which shape has a diagonals that are congruent? Yeah, it's a rectangle. This is going to be a rectangle. This is all in that quadrilateral flowchart. It's under the properties of rectangles. The diagonals are congruent, so we can assume that it's going to be a rectangle. And that's why. All right, and then we're not going to do checkpoint 3 down here. Don't like it. So, okay, I think that's all we have for today. Kind of a short lesson. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and we will talk soon.